Hello, I'm Ian Henschke and welcome to State Lines South Australia. Also tonight we'll have more from the day's developments on the federal election trail. But first to an issue that some want to play a much bigger part in the federal election. According to a number of MPs, the state's food security is increasingly being put at risk by a series of decisions. One is allowing foreign food into the country, another is allowing prime countryside to be swallowed up by housing. And as Simon Raw reports, the question of food security also ties into the debate about population and immigration.
In this brand new packing shed, Cam Stafford is showing off the fruits of local growers' labour. Both the apples and the shed itself.
Well, I'm fairly confident it's the most modern in Australia. It's not necessarily the biggest, but it's most modern. But I could also probably go and say there's probably nothing much better in the world, in actual fact.
The big new shed is in the main street of Lenswood, in the heart of the Adelaide Hills, a place where Cam Stafford says apple growing has old roots.
This property that is behind was acquired in the 1870s, and I would say that most of the growers in this district have certainly been here for several generations.
Yep, and I'm the fourth generation living in my home, and my son is the fifth living in my home, which is on apple orchard.
The question, though, the orchardists are asking themselves now is for how much longer. The federal government has recently approved the importation of Chinese apples into Australia, and the apple growers have lost their appeals against that.
Oh, it's definitely a threat to our industry. As I said before, we do supply the Australian market. Most apple growers in Australia are feeling the real pressure at this point of time. There are very few happy apple growers.
We cannot allow our clean green image to be destroyed by having apples coming in and other fruit coming in from countries where their food standards are much lower, where we don't know what their labour laws will be compared to our labour laws.
Local Liberal MP Jamie Briggs and Independent Senator Nick Xenophon may seem an odd political pair, but they are united in their opposition to Chinese apples. They argue it's a risk to food security and it may see the introduction of Chinese fruit fly into Australia.
Whether it's China, whether it's India, whether it's the United States, whether it's New Zealand, I don't mind which country it is. I want our food to be the best quality food that we've got, and importing risks isn't something we should not do.
Federal Agriculture Minister Tony Burke was not available for interview. Dr Colin, who heads Biosecurity Australia, the organisation which approves food imports, insists there's little risk of Chinese fruit fly hitching a ride in the apples. He says pears, which are a hard fruit like apples, have been imported from China for years without a problem.
Well, the job has been done very, very rigorously, and in fact we did look at the issues associated with the fly. The fly is not known to attack hard fruits. It is known to attack damaged and rotting fruit, but we're not expecting to be sent damaged and rotting fruit because that's not what exports are all about.
But the politicians have another argument. They say this isn't just an apple orchard. It is a place, along with vineyards, wheat crops and sheep paddocks, that's crucial to Australia's national security.
Well, I am for free trade, absolutely. I mean, this country needs trade, but we need to also protect our own industries and ensure that we have safe and reliable sources of food.
The way Australia is going, we will be a net importer of food in the next 10 years. Now that is something that should set all the alarm bells off. It is something that affects our national security, it affects our food security, and we need to sort this out sooner rather than later. And we need to actually draw a line in the sand to say that we need to have controls in this country for our biosecurity to ensure the viability of our local industry, because I don't want this country to become a net importer of food and all that means.
Cam Stafford says China is the world's largest apple grower, and the politicians argue if Australian growers lose market share, then investments like this could be threatened.
Lenswood is a cooperative, meaning of course that the growers own the business. They're the ones who put the $5.5 million into building this new facility. So new, in fact, it hasn't even had its official opening. Most of the apples, they say, grown in the Adelaide Hills come here, where they're sorted, packed and stored. And their point is obvious. If they're not viable, then neither is any of this.
But South Australia's Agriculture Minister says the figures simply don't support the fears and that the state's food sector has been consistently growing at least 5% a year.
Look, I wouldn't go hard on the Chinese. If we didn't have the trading relationship that we have with China, we would have gone into recession with the rest of the world. It's the strength of that trading relationship with China that really underpins our very, very high standard of living.
Don't fence me in. Don't fence me in. But across the state there appears to be a fertile field for worries over food security, from claims that labelling laws are too lax to concerns for the very land itself.
So how are you going to get on producing top quality chalk-hill wines?
In Wollonga, right next door to some of John Harvey's prized old vines, this new housing development is going up.
Well, can I be perfectly frank? We're looking at stupidity. I just think it is unbelievable that planning laws allow houses to be put that close to a vineyard. Simon, if we want to plant a vineyard, we would have to have a 50-metre buffer around that vineyard to protect the houses. And there we are, plonking those houses next to vineyards that have been there for over 100 years.
John Harvey believes he could face years of heartache and complaints from his would-be new neighbours. A working vineyard can be a noisy place. There's spraying and pruning, and at harvest time, a great big mechanical harvester in the middle of the night. And John Harvey says he had no input.
Initially, the development was overturned. Then there was an appeal, which we weren't informed of, and the developer was allowed to proceed with it. First I knew about it was when I was out operating in the vineyard and I saw some survey pegs.
I'd like to have a look at that particular issue, because it could well be that local government have been not as thorough as they ought to have been in that particular issue.
The council says it consistently opposed plans for the site, and ultimately it was a decision made by the Environment, Resources and Development Court. Part of the problem, according to wine writer Phillip White, is that nobody is quite sure of what they're building on, or indeed growing grapes on. He's part of a group that has just finished what they say is the first mapping of the geology around the McLaren Vale wine region, setting out the optimal areas for specific types of grapes.
Unfortunately, I would say about 40% of the very best viticultural land in this district is under housing. This has happened gradually and consistently since Dunstan's era. Modbury and Golden Grove was really, really good viticulture country. Australia's biggest dry-grown vineyard was there, owned by the Winds. Donny did a deal with them to replace that gradually with housing, and the same thing has happened right down the coast. It's really sad.
The state government has a 30-year Greater Adelaide plan, which it says protects agriculture and prime land from housing development. But Family First MP Rob Brokenshire insists that's not a legal protection. He wants a right to farm bill guaranteeing farmers' rights to farm in particular areas. And he's also put up the Wollonga Basin Protection Bill.
In law, there would be no subdivision east of the Selleck South Road and in pockets on the western side until local community, with expert planning support, make a decision on what can be subdivided and what can't be subdivided, but it particularly excludes our prime agricultural land from housing development.
But Michael O'Brien says protection in law is exactly what the 30-year plan delivers.
What the plan does is it prescribes land use. So it says this is agricultural land, and the land is zoned accordingly.
It is all food for thought in a federal election campaign that's talking about population, immigration and quality of life. The conclusions, though, are very much a matter of personal taste.
Given all that you have said, why do you think people are still worried about food security?
Well, look, I find that inexplicable, because we are year on year seeing substantial growth in our food production. I just wonder whether the concern is misplaced.
I think we're actually getting to a tipping point in the community where they want action on food labelling, they want action on biosecurity, and our current system has failed them. And now is the time for change, and I want this to be an election issue. My dream is to have the Labor and Liberal parties having a pretty well identical policy on food labelling and on food security so that our farmers can plan with confidence and we as consumers know we're getting the best produce.